Today I'm going to be doing an acrylic painting demonstration of this turtle and asteroid and tree and all the things. I just painted all the things in this one. Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. For today's project, I am working on a Fredrix Blue Label Ultra Smooth canvas. This is a 24 by 36 inch, so it's kind of big. Actually, the whole thing doesn't even fit on my camera screen right now. The reason that I chose this canvas is I knew I was going to be using a fair amount of airbrushing, and airbrushing usually looks best if you're working on a really smooth canvas. Also, I had a lot of detail work to paint in, and that is also going to look better, or be a lot easier to do anyway, on a very, very smooth surfaced canvas. Just for transparency, I am sponsored by Fredrix, but I'm not actually being paid to make this video. It's just what I would have used anyway. All of the supplies that I used are listed below in the video description. If you are supporters over on Patreon, the longer version of this tutorial is available for you now, so make sure to head over and check that out. If you are unfamiliar with Patreon, you get access to each of my weekly 1 to 2 hour long videos, so they're a lot slower than what you see here on YouTube, and access to all of my past longer tutorials. There's over 100 there, so that's a lot of videos for as little as $4 a month. Sales pitch over. Let's get on to this tutorial. Don't worry, the camera is not going to be at this angle for long, but because this canvas is so long, this is what we're having to work with. So for this one, I started by painting my canvas just a medium blue. I used phthalo blue with some white to get that base color. I thought I would try airbrushing my background, that it would be faster, and quickly realized that a canvas this size, it was just going to be faster for me, and I was going to get a richer, darker color right off the bat by using a 2-inch brush and just painting everything in. For this, I want it to be underwater, or look, it's going to fade from underwater into space. So I'm using straight black paint, and I'm going to fade up into phthalo blue and then phthalo blue mixed with white. Now, one of the things that people always say is, or you'll hear so often, don't use black in your artwork. Don't use black in your paint. It's a dead color. It's a flat color. Yes and no. I use black all the time, but I don't leave it flat black. I'm going to glaze other colors over it, or in my case, I'm going to airbrush magenta colors over it and get this really nice, rich, deep color that has a lot of depth. So there's nothing wrong with using black. I just wouldn't normally recommend, and there are always exceptions, but normally I won't leave it flat black because it is flat and it doesn't have the depth. So here I'm mixing in a bit of phthalo blue with white, and I'm using a filbert brush and just sketching in the water surface, keeping a very loose brush stroke there. And I'm also using a fair amount of paint on the brush. If you don't use enough paint, you won't get those nice smooth lines. Getting the hint of seaweed here. I'm mixing blue with, or phthalo blue with a bit of my black, and this is Mars black. Ivory black is going to be a bit too translucent. It's not going to show up quite the same. Next, I'm starting to paint in the hint of coral. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing a lot of detail here. I just want that hint of coral so you can see that it's the ocean floor right before it fades into space. And it's very, very messy. I'm not going to sit here with a tiny liner brush and make sure everything's perfect. I don't need that for this. I just need that hint so that when you glance at it, it's like, okay, yeah, coral. And I'm fading the same blue that I used in the water, and I'm fading that into the black. I don't want too many colors here because I don't want this to pull attention away from what my subject is going to be. I'm using two main brushes here, my filbert brush, and then I'm using another brush, a second brush that's a stiffer, more round type shape, and I'm just smudging out some of those brush strokes a little bit so they're not too harsh. So the next thing I did, which you really didn't see there, I went so quickly, is I airbrushed some blue over what I had previously painted, including the seaweed and the blue water. And then I faded that a little bit into the black. Here I'm using a stencil, and I'll have a link to that stencil below in the video description. But I used that stencil to create my space scene. For those of you who are not interested in airbrushing, don't worry, the majority of this is not done in airbrush, but just the space and background. So after I airbrushed that in with white, I went over it with my magenta, and then after that, I went over around the edges, as you can see here, with this blue. And I took that blue and the magenta and covered all of my black. And you can really see that here, the way the light's hitting it. The black is no longer straight black. It's got this color on top of it. I then took another brush and just flicked white paint to create stars, let that dry all the way, and I had drawn my turtle out on a piece of tracing paper, and then I used white transfer paper. I'll have a card pop up showing you how to do that. I used transfer paper to transfer him onto the canvas. The reason that I did that and didn't just start drawing with a white charcoal pencil like I sometimes do is with this background being that dark, that white charcoal pencil, when I made my erasings and fixed things up, because I'm never going to get it right the first time through. I always will do some erasing and adjustments as I draw. If I did that on something this dark, you would really see those smudges. So by drawing it on another piece of paper and then using transfer paper, it kept my background very, very clean. Now drawing in or painting in all of these plates. Now notice how each individual plate on the turtle shell, I'm creating almost this star pattern, these streaky lines. Each shell or each little plate is being painted individually. I'm starting with a base color. It doesn't really matter what my base color is. I just want to cover the black. And then I'm going to take other colors and start creating this very streaky look. I'm painting this wet into wet so that the colors slightly blend together. You can see what my finished goal is over on the left here. So I've got to get this base, and this is a lot lighter than what I'm going to leave my turtle looking like in the end, but I've got to start somewhere. And I'm just going to keep layering and layering until I like how it looks. Don't be afraid. If you have a layer where you think, oh my gosh, this is not what I wanted, just keep painting. Keep working on it until it looks how you wanted. You're not really limited here on how many layers you add. Now I am mixing a little bit of water in with my paint so that it's nice and smooth. Not too much though, because I don't want to thin it to the point where it's really translucent or just doesn't cover well or blend well. Too much water can definitely cause some issues there. And still just working on each one of these plates on his shell individually. Coming back through with some yellow and some reddish brown. I'll do a lot of glazing so that he really looks like he's in the water, or in the background colors from the space scene are reflecting on him. Using a round Simply Simmons brush here with some unbleached titanium white, and I'm going to glaze over this. I don't want to leave those lines straight white like this. A little bit more detailing. See how I just keep layering and keep working and building and building. Now I'm going to leave that alone for now and start painting in his skin. And I'm not going to sit here and add tons of detail. I just need to create the hint of the wrinkles here. I mean, I know I'm going to be covering this. A lot of this is going to be in shadow, so there's no reason for me to sit and put tons of detail knowing that I'm going to cover so much. But I do want to get that hint of those wrinkles on his legs and on his neck and face as well. I want to make this be a little bit brighter than what I want my end result to be, knowing that I'm going to glaze a darker color on top. I want higher contrast now. If I don't get my contrast high enough now, when I glaze the darker colors, you won't see anything. So I really want to hype up that contrast at this stage to make it ready for the glazing stages later. I'm using a small filbert. This one's actually a rake brush, but I'm using it as a filbert here to create, because it's so thin, to create some of these wrinkles. Just kind of watching that reference photo, making sure they're going in the right direction. But I'm not sitting there with a liner brush making sure every little teeny tiny wrinkle is exact to the reference photo. I don't think that's important, and especially for this style, this is very stylized. This is not super, super realistic. I mean, well, the subject matter alone makes it not super realistic. But I mean, I'm not trying to make this look like an absolute photograph. I want to get the hint of wrinkles. I want to get the hint. I'm worrying more about the concept, the balance with the design itself, the lighting. Those are the things that I'm focusing more on, not every little line being exact. Getting the hint of the scales on his legs here now. I'm using a liner brush for that. That is a synthetic hog-haired liner brush. I'm using black paint mixed with some purple for that. I'm going to go ahead and paint in some more grass. For this, I'm mixing, some of this has green, some has green with, it's hooker's green with unbleached titanium white, and then I'm also using a lot of purple in that, pulling in the colors from the background. I've added a lot more unbleached titanium white for some highlights on the grass. I'm going to start pulling in some of the highlights on the turtle. Again, I really want to hype that contrast up, knowing I'm going to glaze over this. And I'll come back through later with the yellows, so it doesn't have to be perfect at this stage. I just want to get an idea of where my lights and darks go. So now I'm taking my deep violet or magenta color, I've mixed it with some water, and that's a very translucent color anyway, so I don't have to mix it with too much water. And I'm just glazing that over bits of the turtle. Not everything. See how I'm taking each individual plate on the shell, different areas on the legs. I'm not covering everything. Some of it I'm leaving the way it was. So now I'm going to start painting in my tree. I just wanted this twisting looking tree trunk. And originally I was going to paint a kind of cliff-like look as the top of the tree, and partway through realized, hey, it's space. Let's use asteroids with grass growing on them as the tops. So this was a fun one because I kept changing my mind on what I was going to do throughout the whole process. I was just experimenting and it was so much fun to paint. And the tree is the same thing. I mean, if you look at what I have right now, that looks terrible. I'm just going to layer and build and build and build until it gets to that end result that I want. Blocking in this medium gray or a darker gray for my asteroid. I'm not going to worry about details yet. I'll add those later. I just want to get them the shapes blocked in. Going to come back to the tree now and work on some finer details. I've switched back to that round Simply Simmons brush, and I'm going to go back and forth between that and one of my smaller filberts. And that is a Taklon bristled filbert. And here's a good stage. If you look at what I'm painting right now versus where that tree ended up, you would look at this and go, yeah, I don't see how you're going to get there. I'm just going to layer it until it looks how I want. I didn't like it at this stage. I thought it looked terrible. So I kept messing with it and layering until I got close to what I wanted that end result to be. Don't look at something that you're working on and let it frustrate you thinking, oh, it's terrible, I'm going to give up. If I gave up at this stage, well, yeah, it looks terrible here. I'm going to keep building and working until it looks how or gets to a stage that I like. So I'm going to start blocking in the holes for my asteroid. And what I'm doing is blocking them in with my black and then taking that clean brush, the stiff round brush, and just smudging the bottom side of all of these little holes and crevices so that it fades. It gives it more depth instead of just being a solid black dot, if that makes sense. You can see how it's harsher. The edge is harsher on the top of these holes, but the bottom is very soft where I've smudged out. And that makes it look deep instead of just a black spot. Adding some of this magenta color. Just slowly building highlights. And if you look here, the highlights that I'm adding, that's not the color they're going to stay. Don't stress yourself out. This is something that I see a lot of people do. They get so stressed out about color that they're not willing to experiment. Get it, just paint it. Paint something. If you don't like the color, you can glaze over it later. Don't let the idea of I need the perfect color in the exact right space or spot scare you. Just paint until it looks good. Layer until you like how it looks. I constantly, as you watch this, look how many times I change things. It doesn't have to be perfect on your first layers. And I see a lot of artists get very frustrated early on because those first layers don't look good. Adding some more highlights to these asteroids, and I added some branches to the top of my tree that are attached to that bigger asteroid. Most of these bright blue areas that I just added look terrible, and I'll end up covering those a lot later on. I'm going to start adding the grass. Now this I need to be a bit brighter than what I want my end result to be because I know I'm going to airbrush blue on top of it so that it looks more like that's reaching into the water portion of this. In order for that to work, it's got to be a lot brighter, a lot more contrast because it's going to tone down. And the great thing about this, when I go over that and airbrush the blue, it pushes this back. Right now, it almost looks like it was a sticker cut out from something else and just stuck on top of my background. It doesn't look like it's a part of the background. And that's where when I come through and airbrush that blue, it's going to push this back into the scene. And if you don't have an airbrush, you can glaze the blue. Just use either glazing medium or water to thin your blue paint, and you can tone that down, and it will really bring your background and your foreground together more so they feel like they go together. Glazing or airbrushing, which I'm using as a glaze, is just such a great way to bring your background and foreground together. So I've got a little tree on top here. I'm just dabbing the paint in there, and that's not the shape it's going to end up. I actually didn't like the shape I ended up with here at all. So I'm going to come back through and add some more. Just keep playing with it until it looks how you want. It wasn't something to freak out and go, oh, that looks terrible. No, just add more. Just keep working on it. Some more highlights here on this asteroid. Again, I've got to remember, I know I'm going to tone this down with the blue, so it's very important that my contrast be harsher now than what I want my end result to be. If I don't get enough contrast here, when I come on top with the blue, it's going to be too dark. I'm not going to see any lights or darks. And everything with painting like this, it's a layering process. You will have bad layers. That's okay. Just keep working on it. But it's just layer on top of layer. A lot of people, and I know I was one of those, when I first started painting, I seemed to be under the impression that it was more like a paint by number. Just put the right color in the right place and you're done. It'll look realistic. And for this style, that really doesn't work. You're going to layer and build up. So I like to paint whatever is farthest in the background and work my way forward. If you back this video up, look at where that asteroid started. It was just a flat gray mass. But by continuously working on my highlights and my shadows, I'm able to build this up. And for these, it's basically, if you just find a rock or like a lava rock type thing, that really is the shape I'm going for when I work on asteroids, because, you know, not so easy to find good reference photos there. So if you look at lava rocks and just that sort of texture, that will help you to work on things, especially when you're working in surrealism, because I don't have a reference photo of a tree on a turtle. So I will look at reference photos for twisted trees and just kind of combine that. The reference photo for the turtle I took myself, but the rest of this I had to make up. So in this case, I've painted enough asteroids. I didn't use a reference photo, but in the past, when I first started with those, I would just find really cool rock shapes to copy, to learn to paint something that we can't easily get photos of. I've got to start building up my shadows and highlights on these branches. I'm pulling a lot of the magentas, a lot of the colors from my background I want to start pulling into the tree and into the asteroids. I'm going to paint some water coming off of this. Now it looks like I'm painting this water in an angle. It's not. If you look at my finished painting, it comes straight down. It's just because of the camera angle here that it looks like it's leaning off to the right. And I just started with a light blue. There's blue, phthalo blue, and white to create those waterfalls, and I'll come back on top of those with highlights of white. But they're very, very easy. But you want to make sure when that water is coming down that it does fall straight. It'll look a lot better. So back into working on shadows. I'm adding some of this black here. I'm keeping it very streaky. I've taken a light magenta, I've mixed white in with my deep violet color to create this lighter magenta color for the underside of the tree, and then the upper side I've got that lighter blue, which would be reflecting from the water above. And I'll darken that up quite a bit too. Now at around this stage, I actually took my reference photo, or my painting, I'm sorry, took a photo of it and imported it over into Photoshop and did a little bit of digital work to see, okay, I know it needs more. Do I want to add fish? Do I want to add, or in this case I ended up going with fireflies, but I wanted to try it out before I actually hit the canvas. So I messed around with it and decided I really liked this yellowy gold glow on the turtle and on the firefly, or, you know, adding fireflies. It just added so much to it. And this is where I think learning Photoshop, learning a little bit of digital painting, which most people, if you've got an iPad, if you've got I like the Galaxy tablets the best because you can actually get pens that use the same technology as the Wacom tablets, but you can use these different tools, or at least the new ones, not the old ones. Do your research. Don't take my word for that there. I think I just made it sound like any of them will do it. But anyway, you can do painting, digital painting on a lot of these tablets. You don't have to have the big expensive Wacom tablets in order to do that. But I was able to do some Photoshop directly on the photo of my artwork to decide if I liked that change. And I really did. I liked that yellowy tone. So I'm taking a straight board and just airbrushing the white rays of light. That's how I keep that nice and straight. Then I'm going to come down here. Now the fireflies and the yellow gold look was too yellow to me, too kind of a fluorescent yellow. I wanted more of an orange look. So I'm taking my orange, and the Liquitex Basics, these bright orange colors are so translucent that I really don't even have to thin them much with water. They're so translucent on their own. Perfect for glazing. Not so great if I wanted to paint a bright orange fish. I would actually mix my own in that case. But for glazing, just a bit of that orange tint, they were perfect for this. I'm just going right right on top of everywhere where I added that yellow. And that gave me this really nice warm glow and made such a difference. I mean, my work on this painting before I added that orange glow and the fireflies, it's huge. It's night and day the difference that that made. And I felt comfortable in trying that out first by doing it as a digital painting versus I may have been afraid. I may not have added that on my painting because I wasn't sure if it was going to look good. But because I was able to test it out digitally first, it made me brave enough to go, okay, I'm going to go ahead and add this to my painting. So play around with some photo apps on either your phones or your tablets. Play around with that for your artwork, because sometimes, like in this case, I was able to try something completely, I mean, that's pretty bold. Those gold lines are bold, and that would have been too scary for me to go straight to the canvas with without seeing if I liked how it looked first. And I've done that on so many paintings. It's just a really helpful tool. I do have prints of this one available over on my print shop. I have a link to that below in the video description. Last week, I got a new art supply item. Meet Albert. Albert is a Wacom Cintiq. This is their 27-inch QHD, and he's going to make it so much easier for me to do tutorials for you guys with color theory and just showing you how to do different things that would apply to any medium. So I'm really excited to use him for some of the upcoming videos that I'm planning. So far, I've done a couple of paintings on this guy. This one's my favorite so far. I'm still playing around with different background ideas. And here's a digital painting of a sky chicken. Hey, have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going to it. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all of my new art videos every single week.